They say justice is blind, but in the Metropolitan Police Department, it had become something far worse: corrupted, calculated, and cruel. For decades, a hidden network of officers had perfected the art of destroying lives with a badge, training rookies to see threats where none existed. To them, Officer Savannah Mitchell seemed like the perfect recruit, young, ambitious, and eager to learn their playbook. Savannah had been proud of her first solo patrol. With her freshly pressed uniform and polished badge, she walked into the precinct determined to prove herself. Veteran Sergeant Thompson tried to caution her about the realities of city policing, reminding her that communities were complex and deserved understanding. Savannah brushed him off, convinced that her academy honors and her father's lessons about authority were enough. Confidence hardened into arrogance. Her morning passed without trouble. A shoplifting call, a few traffic tickets, even an argument between neighbors, all handled in ways that reaffirmed her self-image as a capable officer. Then came the call that would define her career: a suspicious man outside a convenience store. Darnell Washington was simply waiting for his sister, dressed in business casual clothes and scrolling through his phone. Savannah saw only what she had been conditioned to see, a threat where there was none. Her tone was clipped, her stance authoritative. When Darnell calmly explained himself, she demanded identification. His polite question, "May I ask why?" was enough to trigger her suspicion. Within moments, her voice rose. Passers-by began recording, and a peaceful encounter turned into an arrest. Savannah claimed he resisted. Video evidence later showed otherwise. He had reached slowly for his wallet, announcing his intention, but she interpreted it as defiance. Back at the station, Savannah's report was written with confident flourish. She painted herself as vigilant, Darnell as uncooperative. To her, it was a textbook example of good policing. To her colleagues, it was a worrying sign. Sergeant Thompson exchanged a grim look with Lieutenant Chen, recognizing the familiar pattern of an officer who mistook authority for justice. Meanwhile, Darnell's family sought help. His mother, Patricia, tearfully explained to civil rights attorney Marcus Williams that her son was an accountant with no record, wrongfully arrested for waiting on a sidewalk. Williams recognized the seriousness of the case, especially when he learned it had been assigned to Judge Marcus Carter. Judge Carter's name carried weight. Years earlier, he had turned his own wrongful imprisonment into a mission to expose systemic corruption. Known as the Scale, his reputation was one of precision and fairness. Justice in his courtroom was not just blind, it was inevitable. As he reviewed Savannah's report, Carter noted its exaggerated emphasis on authority and its glossing over of facts. He requested her training records and every piece of video evidence available. He had seen too many reports like this before. Savannah, however, remained confident. She dismissed concerns, laughed off suggestions to recheck her body cam, and told colleagues that Judge Carter would surely side with her. She polished her badge, rehearsed her testimony, and walked into the courthouse certain of victory. The hearing drew a crowd. Darnell sat at the defense table with his attorney, his family in the front row behind him. Savannah, sitting beside the city's attorney, radiated composure. When the proceedings began, Williams immediately moved to dismiss the charges, citing multiple recordings that showed Darnell's compliance and Savannah's unjustified escalation. Carter instructed the videos to be played. The courtroom grew silent as the footage rolled. On screen, Darnell stood calmly outside the store, Savannah's aggressive approach evident from the start. Each video angle confirmed the same truth. His slow, deliberate movements were peaceful, her reactions fueled by bias and preconceptions. Savannah tried to interject, but Carter's sharp rebuke silenced her. In his courtroom, facts mattered more than confidence. He had endured too much injustice himself to let fabrication go unchecked. As the evidence unfolded, Savannah's narrative collapsed. What she thought would be her triumphant first solo arrest had instead become a public lesson on power, prejudice, and accountability. Darnell's dignity in the face of humiliation contrasted starkly with her arrogance. Judge Carter, balancing the files of a spotless citizen and a rookie officer's flawed report, prepared to render a decision that would echo far beyond the courtroom. For Savannah Mitchell, the truth was unavoidable. The badge she had polished so proudly would not shield her from the consequences of her actions. Justice, once corrupted by those who trained her, now stood ready to reveal its true face. The courtroom was silent as the second video played, this time from Savannah Mitchell's own body camera. The angle was different, but the story it told was the same, only worse. Her voice sounded harsher than she remembered, every clipped command echoing with aggression. Judge Carter leaned forward as Marcus Williams, the defense attorney, highlighted the timestamp. Savannah's report claimed she had observed Darnell Washington's behavior for several minutes before making contact. The footage showed she approached him within seconds. The city's attorney, James Morton, shifted uncomfortably, arguing that timing might be slightly off, but insisting that Savannah had reasonable suspicion. Williams interrupted, producing subpoenaed dispatch records that showed the call had come from a payphone. No witnesses ever reported suspicious behavior. Either Savannah had fabricated the call, or she had acted without verifying it. Heat rose in Savannah's face. She hadn't expected them to trace it. The truth was simpler and far more damning. She saw Darnell standing there, decided he didn't belong, and filled in the rest later. Carter's gaze was sharp as he asked the city to respond. Morton begged for more time, but Williams pressed forward, methodically dismantling Savannah's report. Witness after witness testified, store owners, supervisors, even a jogger who had filmed part of the arrest. Each detail chipped away at the version Savannah had carefully written. During recess, Morton pulled her aside, his voice low and urgent. "You told me the videos supported your story. You told me you had probable cause. This looks bad." Savannah clung to her earlier bravado, insisting the defense was twisting things. But even she could hear the crack in her voice. Morton stared at her for a long moment, then warned, "Start thinking about what you're going to say when Carter puts you on the stand." When court resumed, Darnell Washington himself testified. Savannah sat stiffly, watching him take the oath. In her report, she had painted him as hostile and defiant. On the stand, he was calm, articulate, and heartbreakingly human. He explained how he had never been arrested or even given a traffic ticket, how Thursday lunches with his sister were routine, and how this arrest had shaken his faith in the very system he had trusted. "I used to believe," he said, voice breaking slightly, "that if you did everything right, you'd be okay. Now I tense up every time I see a patrol car. I had to explain to my nieces why their uncle was in handcuffs. How do you explain that to children?" His mother stifled a sob from the gallery. Then it was Savannah's turn. Walking to the witness box, her confidence faltered under the fluorescent lights. She repeated the justifications she had rehearsed, but Williams pressed relentlessly. "Why did you find his behavior suspicious?" She started with the call. Williams cut her off. The call came from an empty payphone. "Let's talk about what you saw." She claimed it was a high-crime area. Williams produced crime statistics showing it was one of the safest districts in the city. Carter sustained the objection and told her to stick to direct observations. Her answers grew weaker with every question. Finally, Williams delivered the fatal blow. "In your report, you wrote that Mr. Washington made a sudden, threatening movement. In none of the videos, yours, the bystanders, or the store's security camera, does such a movement appear. How do you explain this?" Sweat pooled at Savannah's temples. The silence was suffocating. She looked at Darnell, at his family, then at Carter, whose eyes bore into her. The weight of truth pressed down until the lie cracked. "No, sir," she whispered. Carter leaned forward. "Speak up, officer." Her voice broke as she admitted, "No, Your Honor." He didn't make a threatening move. "I wrote what I thought would justify the arrest." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. The authority she had built her identity on collapsed in an instant. Carter's voice was steady, but sharp. "Mr. Morton, I expect the city's motion to dismiss all charges within the hour. I am also ordering a full investigation into Officer Mitchell's conduct, both in this incident and in her prior arrests. Officer Mitchell, remain in my chambers. We will discuss the consequences of perjury." The gavel fell, echoing like a final verdict. The next morning, the courthouse buzzed with reporters calling it the Mitchell case. Inside his chambers, Judge Carter reviewed new files from River Creek, the small department where Savannah had trained. The record was suspiciously thin. Training footage had conveniently been lost in a system upgrade. Carter made a note to press further. Too many coincidences were stacking up. Meanwhile, Darnell and his family prepared with Williams. Photographs and testimony proved Darnell's Thursday routine beyond doubt. More troubling were accounts from others Savannah had arrested during training, each telling similar stories of false assumptions and heavy-handed tactics. At the precinct, Thompson and Chen reviewed old evaluations. Concerns had been raised about Savannah's bias, but staffing shortages and test scores had overridden them. "We should have pushed harder," Thompson muttered. Back in court, Savannah's posture was different. The polished uniform remained, but the swagger was gone. Her former training partner, Officer Rodriguez, testified next. He described how Savannah often assumed guilt before investigations began. "We once got a noise complaint," he said. Before we even stepped out of the car, she said it was probably gang-related. It turned out to be a children's birthday party. He admitted he had reported these concerns, only to see his evaluations altered to downplay them. 2 more training officers confirmed the same. Morton tried to save ground with an expert witness, Dr. Angela Martinez, who testified that Savannah's behavior reflected confirmation bias and an authority complex, worsened by inadequate oversight. She explained that the system itself had reinforced her worldview, prioritizing technical efficiency over community understanding. Carter listened intently, asking pointed questions that revealed how many red flags had been ignored. The afternoon ended with Michelle Washington, Darnell's sister. She described how Thursday lunches had begun after their father's death, a family ritual of healing. Her voice trembled but remained strong. "My brother wasn't lurking or acting suspicious. He was waiting for me, that's all. And instead of lunch, I found him in handcuffs." The room fell into heavy silence. Savannah sat frozen, realizing the case was no longer just about one arrest. It was about her, the choices she made, and the system that had allowed her to believe she could act without consequence. For the first time, she understood what Judge Carter meant when he said justice wasn't blind in his courtroom. It was inevitable. The courtroom held its breath as Michelle Washington testified, her voice steady though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. She spoke about her weekly Thursday lunches with her brother, a ritual born after their father's passing, a way to honor his memory. Every Thursday, without fail, Darnell would wait outside her workplace, and together they'd share a meal, sometimes talking about their week, sometimes about their father. On the day of the incident, Michelle had been delayed by a patient emergency. By the time she reached the front of the building, Darnell was already in handcuffs. She tried to explain to Officer Mitchell that he was her brother, that this was their routine. But the officer refused to listen, insisting that he had been resisting arrest. "He wasn't resisting," Michelle said, her voice cracking. "He wasn't doing anything wrong." The courtroom sat in silence as she described the helplessness she felt, the frantic call to her mother, and the way her family had been shaken since that day. When asked if their lunches continued, Michelle admitted softly that they had stopped. Darnell could no longer bring himself to that part of town without panic taking over. "She didn't just arrest my brother," Michelle said through tears. "She took something precious from our family." When Michelle stepped down, Detective Sarah Martinez from Internal Affairs was sworn in. Calm and precise, she revealed the results of her investigation into Officer Mitchell's past arrests. 13 cases during her training period showed the same troubling patterns: questionable causes for contact, escalating encounters sparked by Mitchell's approach, and official reports at odds with civilian recordings. Worse still, much of the body camera footage tied to these incidents was mysteriously corrupted or missing. Only by tracking down bystander videos had investigators been able to verify what truly happened. Martinez testified that the chain of custody for digital evidence was riddled with gaps and technical glitches that curiously seemed to affect the same group of officers, those with multiple complaints filed against them. The implications were impossible to ignore. This wasn't a coincidence, but a system designed to protect certain officers and bury the truth. Judge Carter's expression grew darker with every word, and he ordered the department's record supervisors and IT staff to testify the following day. Outside the courtroom, conversations spilled into the hallways. Judge Carter, back in his chambers, quietly directed his clerk to subpoena additional records from River Creek, where Mitchell had trained. In the parking lot, Darnell and Michelle clung to each other, finally daring to hope that justice might come. And in a shadowed stairwell, Sergeant Thompson found Savannah sitting alone, her head buried in her hands. He sat beside her, his voice low and weary. "You didn't mean to hurt him?" he asked gently. Savannah lifted her red-rimmed eyes and shook her head. Thompson sighed. "Sometimes not meaning it is worse, because it means you never thought about the damage at all." His words cut deeper than any cross-examination could. For the first time, Savannah began to understand that true authority wasn't about power. It was about restraint, responsibility, and humility. By the next morning, the courthouse buzzed with restless energy. Reporters crowded the steps, their cameras trained on the doors. Inside, Judge Carter reviewed newly delivered files from River Creek, his face tightening as he read a letter from another judge warning of political pressure to hide certain records. The IT manager, James Phillips, entered with Detective Martinez and presented logs from the department's servers. The missing body cam footage, he revealed, wasn't the result of random glitches. Someone had deliberately tampered with it, corrupting video segments while leaving the metadata intact to avoid suspicion. The access logs pointed to Captain Robert Drake's credentials, though the usage pattern suggested someone else had been using his login. The tampering spanned at least 18 months and affected not only Mitchell's footage, but dozens of officers whose records contained civilian complaints. Carter ordered a full list of every compromised case and every officer implicated. The revelations shifted the trial's scope dramatically. No longer was it just about a rookie officer's misconduct. It was about a department-wide culture of protection, manipulation, and systemic abuse. Savannah sat at the prosecution table, her uniform still neat but her posture broken, realizing she was only a small cog in a much larger machine. Testimony continued with Sergeant Thompson, who finally unburdened himself of years of ignored warnings. He told the court how complaints were buried, how body cam malfunctions became routine excuses, and how good officers were pressured into silence. "You have to decide," he said firmly, "whether you're the kind of cop who upholds the law or hides behind it." His words carried the weight of lived truth. Civilian after civilian took the stand, each recounting eerily similar encounters, ordinary routines twisted into confrontations, fabricated reports, lives scarred by unnecessary arrests. Then came the most devastating blow. Captain Drake himself walked into the courtroom, flanked by his attorney. He admitted he had struck a deal for immunity in exchange for full disclosure. His testimony peeled back the final layer of denial. The corruption was deliberate, orchestrated by leadership, and Mitchell had been selected because she fit their mold. Ambitious, authority-driven, and compliant with unwritten rules. Her training had been tailored to reinforce her biases, her mistakes shielded, her misconduct buried. As Drake spoke, Savannah felt her last illusions collapse. Everything she thought she had earned was built on lies and manipulation. By late afternoon, Judge Carter reconvened the session. His tone was decisive, his authority unshaken. The investigation, he declared, would expand beyond Mitchell's case into a full review of departmental practices. A special master would oversee the process. Every compromised case would be reopened. Every officer implicated in Drake's testimony would face scrutiny. As for Mitchell, she was suspended immediately pending further review and ordered to cooperate fully with the investigation. To Darnell, Carter dismissed the charges with prejudice, granting him the right to pursue civil damages. Savannah rose unexpectedly, her voice trembling as she addressed the Washington family. She apologized, not only for what she had done to Darnell, but for what she had embodied, for confusing authority with infallibility. "I thought being an officer meant never questioning yourself," she said. "I was wrong, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make that right." The courtroom remained silent, her words echoing long after she sat down. As the day closed, Carter adjourned with firm instructions for all evidence to be preserved. Outside, the sun sank low, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps where reporters clamored for statements. Families walked out with cautious hope, while Savannah lingered behind, hearing Michelle's voice in her mind. "Every Thursday, I expect to see my brother waiting, and he's not there." For the first time, Savannah truly understood the weight of what she had taken. Not just a man's freedom, but a family's ritual, a bond, a memory. Judge Carter watched from his chamber window, Knowing the headlines would tell one story, but the real battle was only beginning. The slow work of rebuilding trust, repairing lives, and restoring accountability would stretch far beyond his courtroom. And for Savannah Mitchell, the reckoning had only just begun. Desperation had driven Savannah Mitchell to this point. After 3 sleepless nights, the investigation was destroying everything she had built and believed in. Scouring old records, she stumbled on a news article from 35 years ago. Local teen cleared after 3 months in detention. The grainy photo showed a young Marcus Carter embraced by his parents outside a courthouse. The story revealed he had been wrongfully arrested for robbery, despite witnesses proving he was at a school event. He had spent 3 months in juvenile detention before being cleared. Savannah's phone buzzed. Kevin Nash, a journalist, had agreed to meet her at Riverside Diner. She typed quickly, "On my way." The diner was nearly empty, rain streaking the windows, the fluorescent lights unforgiving. Nash looked younger than she expected, eager for a big story. "You said you had something on Judge Carter?" he asked. Savannah slid a thumb drive across the table. His juvenile record was sealed, but I found coverage. "Did you know he was arrested as a teen?" Nash skimmed the files. "It's public record. What makes it newsworthy?" Savannah leaned in, rehearsed words spilling out. A judge who was wrongfully arrested, now presiding over police misconduct cases. How can he be impartial? Nash frowned. "You're saying he's biased against law enforcement?" "The public deserves to know about potential conflicts," she replied. But the argument felt hollow. When she hinted at darker rumors from Carter's detention days, Nash snapped his laptop shut. "You're asking me to spread unsubstantiated allegations. I'm not doing a hit piece." He walked out, leaving Savannah with rejection stinging deeper than expected. Other journalists refused her calls too. Finally, a controversial blogger agreed to run the story. She sent the files, adding fabricated anonymous sources to suggest bias and violence in Carter's past. By noon, the blog post was live. Exclusive, Judge Carter's hidden past, can we trust his judgment? Social media exploded, rumors spiraling. Local news picked it up. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, and police support groups demanded Carter recuse himself. Inside his chambers, Carter read the article silently. When his clerk asked if they should issue a statement, he replied calmly, "No need. Notify everyone court begins 30 minutes early tomorrow." The next morning, the courtroom was packed with reporters. Savannah sat rigid, every eye seeming to know she was behind the leak. Judge Carter entered at 8:30 sharp. "Before we continue, I will address recent media attention regarding my personal history," he began. He admitted to being wrongfully arrested at 17, spending 3 months in detention before exoneration. These facts are public record. Someone has recently embellished them with unsupported claims. "What isn't public record," he continued, voice firm, "is what I learned. I learned what it feels like to be powerless in a system that presumes guilt. I learned that authority without accountability is institutional bullying. And I learned that justice delayed is often justice denied. Those lessons shaped my career, and they are why I will not recuse myself." His gaze locked on Savannah. Someone hoped exposing my past would discredit this investigation. They failed to understand. My experience does not make me biased. It makes me qualified to distinguish proper police work from abuse of power. The court proceeded to examine how sealed records had been accessed. IT manager James Phillips testified that unauthorized searches were made at 2:17 a.m. from a precinct computer using Savannah's login. Journalist Nash testified about their diner meeting, followed by emails from others she had contacted. Finally, the blogger admitted under oath that Savannah had implied violent rumors, which he embellished. Evidence piled high, and Savannah felt her career disintegrating. During recess, Carter confronted her in a quiet hallway. "Why?" he asked, his voice more sad than angry. "I thought if people questioned your objectivity," she began, but he cut her off. "You thought wrong. Do you know what I remember most from detention? Not the fear, but Officer James Wilson, who saw me reading law books. Instead of mocking me, he gave me more. He taught me that wearing a badge doesn't make someone good or bad. It's how they use the authority that comes with it." Savannah's eyes filled with tears. "I just wanted to protect my career." Carter shook his head. "No, You wanted to protect your illusions about it. Back in court, Carter declared that character assassination would not sway the proceedings, but Savannah's ethical violations would be added to the ongoing investigation. Testimonies about systemic corruption continued, but Savannah barely heard them. Late in the afternoon, an elderly man entered. Carter's voice softened. "Officer Wilson." The retired guard smiled. "Been following the case. Thought you might need a friendly face." The judge recessed briefly, and Savannah watched as Carter embraced the man who had once believed in him. For the first time, she understood what true authority meant, not power or control, but the ripples of impact one life can leave. The next morning at dawn, pounding shook Savannah's door. "FBI, open up!" 4 agents entered with a warrant. "Officer Savannah Mitchell, you're under arrest for tampering with evidence, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law." Neighbors peered from behind curtains as she was led away in handcuffs. Across town, similar arrests unfolded. Captain Drake, training officers, even the IT manager. In his chambers, Judge Carter reviewed federal warrants with U.S. Attorney Rebecca Chen. "This wasn't isolated," she explained. "We've uncovered a network spanning 3 states. Your case broke it open." At FBI headquarters, Savannah sat in an interrogation room. Special Agent Monica Torres entered with photographs. "Let's talk about River Creek," she said, laying out proof of a conspiracy Savannah had been part of without grasping its scale. The evidence showed systematic training in evidence manipulation and selective enforcement. Savannah stared at the photographs, realizing too late that her desperation to protect her career had made her a pawn in something far darker. Savannah Mitchell sat across from Agent Torres in the gray interrogation room, her wrists resting on the cold table. Torres's voice was gentle but sharp. "Is that what you told yourself? That arresting without cause, falsifying evidence, violating civil rights, was just doing your job?" Savannah flinched, the words cutting deeper than accusation. In another room, IT manager James Phillips was unraveling. He admitted they'd approached him right after he was hired. At first he deleted small video files. Later, he was ordered to install software that could corrupt body camera footage. Across the hall, Captain Drake sat grim-faced with his lawyer as U.S. Attorney Rebecca Chen explained that his old immunity deal no longer applied. "Departmental misconduct is one thing. Federal crimes are another. We have your emails, your financial records, even travel logs. You helped expand this network." By midday, the federal courthouse buzzed with activity. Journalists crowded the steps, cameras flashing, as Chen stood before a packed courtroom. "What began as one officer's misconduct has revealed a systematic effort to subvert justice," she said. "This network recruited officers willing to abuse their authority, trained them in evidence manipulation, and worked to discredit anyone who threatened exposure." In the gallery, Darnell Washington and his family listened, their civil case now at the center of a landmark prosecution. During a recess, their lawyer Marcus Williams explained in a quiet conference room, "This isn't just about you anymore. The FBI has uncovered coordinated abuse across multiple states. Your case opened the door to hundreds of victims finally having a voice." Patricia Washington squeezed her son's hand, tears in her eyes. Back in interrogation, Torres leaned forward. "Why you?" Savannah asked. Torres slid a file across the table. "Because you were ideal. Young, ambitious, already conditioned to obey. They spotted you in River Creek, guided your transfer, made sure your training reinforced loyalty. You weren't just a rookie, Savannah, you were an investment." The truth staggered her. Her career, her assignments, even the patrol that led to Darnell's arrest, it had all been orchestrated. She whispered, "If I cooperate, I need to know." "How many did they hurt?" Torres opened another folder. "Over 300 cases so far, 15 departments. And that's just what we can prove." Later in Carter's courtroom, Savannah testified in a plain gray suit, her police badge gone. She explained how Lieutenant Cooper had invited her to a so-called mentorship meeting after her 3rd shift. There, officers discussed maintaining authority, then handed out templates for falsified reports. On the screen, Chen projected one of the documents. Savannah pointed, "See? The civilian is always described as aggressive or non-compliant first. Our actions are framed as responses, never the other way around. Sergeant Thompson sat in the gallery, his expression heavy as his former rookie revealed the machinery of corruption. Phillips followed on the stand, explaining how the software wasn't just for erasing files, it created fake technical failures designed to fool investigators. The name of the vendor, Blue Line Security Solutions, rippled through the room. A private company owned by retired police chiefs, profiting from a system of abuse. Victims then took the stand. Jeremy Torres, now 21, described how his wrongful arrest cost him his job and strained his young family. A nurse told of losing her license after a planted drug charge. A college student recalled losing a scholarship. Savannah forced herself to sit through every word, each testimony pressing down on her chest. In a hallway break, Jeremy confronted her directly. "You really didn't see us as people, did you?" Savannah lowered her eyes. "No, we were taught to see threats, statistics, not lives. Quotas were never just numbers. They were individuals with lives, families, and dreams." Now, Savannah saw it too clearly, and she knew she would spend the rest of her life trying to make it right. The prosecution's case concluded with testimony from civil rights experts, who explained the broader social impact of targeted enforcement and systemic bias. They presented data showing how the network's operations had disproportionately harmed minority communities, creating cycles of distrust and fear. In his closing argument, U.S. Attorney Chen reminded the jury that this case was not only about corrupt officers or manipulated evidence, but about the deliberate perversion of justice itself. The defendants hadn't simply broken laws, they had systematically undermined the very principles of equal protection and due process. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning with unanimous, guilty verdicts on all counts for Cooper and the other conspiracy leaders. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month. For Savannah, the hardest moment came after the verdict, when she met Marcus Williams and his clients to apologize. She admitted that words would never be enough, but promised to dedicate her life to repairing the damage she had helped cause. Williams accepted the resolve, but reminded her that their work had only just begun. The civil case needed her testimony about specific incidents, policies, and patterns of behavior. Savannah agreed, knowing the road ahead would be grueling. The civil proceedings revealed another layer of reckoning. Where the criminal trial had focused on leaders of the conspiracy, the civil case exposed the everyday consequences of their policies. Savannah testified for weeks, explaining how routine police actions had been weaponized against civilians. In therapy sessions with Dr. Sarah Reynolds, she struggled with the guilt, confessing that perhaps she didn't deserve to heal. Reynolds reminded her that acknowledging guilt and working toward healing could coexist, that punishment and redemption were not the same thing. The civil case ended with a landmark settlement. Departments involved agreed to sweeping reforms: independent oversight, mandatory bias training, and a civilian review board with real authority. Plaintiffs received significant compensation, though everyone acknowledged that no amount of money could fully repair the damage. Judge Carter's closing remarks were soon quoted in law schools across the country. He said justice was not only about verdicts and settlements, but about changing how authority, accountability, and human dignity were understood. The officers hadn't begun their careers as villains, but had been led astray by a system that valued power over service. Reform, he stressed, meant remembering that the badge symbolized public trust, not immunity from accountability. Savannah devoted herself to reform advocacy, speaking at training academies and warning new officers about the seductive nature of unchecked authority. At a reconciliation forum 1 year after the investigation, she addressed victims directly, including Darnell Washington and his family. She did not ask for forgiveness, but asked for the chance to prevent others from suffering the same injustice. Michelle Washington challenged her with the hardest question: how could they be sure this would not happen again? Savannah answered that now people knew the signs, the small compromises that grew into systemic abuse, the importance of accountability, and the power of those who demanded justice despite the risks. Darnell added his own reflection. The system had not only failed because of corrupt officers, but also because good people had stayed silent. Change, he said, only comes when injustice is no longer tolerated. The forum concluded with the announcement of a new civilian oversight committee made up of community members and reform advocates, with Sergeant Thompson serving as a technical advisor. As the anniversary of Judge Carter's ruling approached, reforms were visible everywhere. Body camera footage was uploaded to independent servers, civilian complaints were handled by outside agencies, and officer training emphasized de-escalation and community engagement. More importantly, there was a subtle shift in how authority was seen, not as a right, but as a responsibility. Communities, though cautious, began to rebuild trust with law enforcement. Savannah's sentencing, delayed due to her cooperation, finally arrived. Judge Carter acknowledged that her actions had caused real harm, but he also recognized her role in dismantling the corrupt system. She was sentenced to 5 years, with 3 suspended, plus supervised release, during which she would continue working on reform efforts. As she was led away, she caught sight of Officer James Wilson, the man who had once reminded Carter of a different path. He nodded, a quiet acknowledgement that even in the darkest corners of corruption, there remained the possibility of light. Savannah's journey from blind obedience to conscious accountability became part of a larger movement, a narrative of justice, reform, and the difficult but necessary work of rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the communities they were meant to serve.